This video is brought to you by Allsport. We're going to recover a motorcycle seat using the Allsport 4-way stretch vinyl fabric that's available from Allsport. This multi-purpose vinyl fabric is designed with a special 360-degree 4-way stretch. Other vinyl materials are not stretchable like Allsport. As you can see here in the video, we stretched the Allsport vinyl material over this shapely motorcycle seat that has a lot of contour, and the fabric formed beautifully around it.
It is so like a shoe.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Let's get started and show you how to recover a motorcycle seat. First thing we need to do is remove the old cover. Here you can see the old cover. The staples have already been removed around the perimeter. Now just remove the vinyl cover. On the underside of the seat there'll be a backer board. Here's a plastic backer board that we'll remove. And you'll notice there are fabric poles. This seat has a contoured rise, and those fabric poles help to pull the fabric down into the contoured shape of the rise. The old cover cannot be removed until the fabric poles are released. From the top view, you can see the fabric poles going through the foam. On the bottom side of the seat, you'll see a tufting clasp. This tufting clasp helps to tension the fabric pole. You notice that it is pushed through a washer. Angela is just turning the clasp so it goes through the hole nicely so she can remove the old cover. Then she pushes it through the foam. Here's a close-up view of what those fabric poles looked like. This seat has a very light plastic film to help prevent water from leaking into the foam. We'll set that aside. To pattern our seat, we're going to use the Allsport 4-way stretch vinyl fabric, and we're going to create 3 separate sections for the top plate. Here you can see Angela roughly cutting the front platform portion of our motorcycle seat cover. Here's a look ahead at those 3 sections, the front platform, the riser section, and the rear platform. Because of the contoured shape of this seat, cutting out separate plates will give us a better fit. Angela slides the roughly cut front platform up a little bit so that she can create a fabric pole. Then she uses a Sharpie marker and marks right along the edge of the contoured shape of the foam underneath the fabric. This is the bottom side of the Allsport 4-way stretch vinyl fabric. To ensure that the opposite side is the same shape, she'll take that fabric and fold it in half, and then she's going to cut it with shears. This way the left side and the right side will be exactly the same shape when she sews it together to the boxing. You'll notice that this front platform or front plate looks like it's a little bit on the small side, but because this is a 4-way stretch fabric, it'll have a perfect fit. Remember that she slid this front plate forward a little bit so there's extra material here as this plate will join the riser, and out of that 1/2 inch extra material she'll create the fabric pole. Here Angela is cutting away some of the excess fabric along the sides because the fabric pole is only in the center of this cushion. And later we'll do some trimming to this as well, but she folds the material in half again so that it's exactly the same on the opposite side of our plate. This excess fabric, about a 1/2 inch, will be used to create the fabric pole, so it is an excess fabric that will be pushed down into the hole in a later step. The front platform or front plate is now complete. Now we'll concentrate on the riser section. This customer has chosen to use a bright violet color here to give the seat more color. Angela has roughly cut this riser section to size. Now she's going to use that Sharpie marker again to mark directly where that riser will stop and be joined to the rear platform. Again, she'll only mark the center portion, then she'll fold the material in half so that the left side and the right side are exactly the same shape. Now she'll simply cut it out with scissors again. An almost perfect fit. Any oversized section will be trimmed after it's sewn together. You may notice that we're not adding any seam allowance. That's because this fabric stretches so much you can basically cut the plates to the exact size. Now for the rear platform or the rear plate, this will be made from a black Allsport material. As you roughly cut this fabric out, be sure you have excess material here because there's a lot of shape in this, the rear platform. Obviously your seat may be different, so be sure that you always have enough material. The material's been turned so the underside is facing up. Then she's going to use that Sharpie marker to mark the outline of the top or the rear platform. As we did with the other two plates, we will only mark it to the center location. Then we'll fold that material in half later on and cut it out with scissors. You'll notice that Angela is carefully trying to find the contoured edge of the foam underneath as she marks it with a Sharpie marker. This rear platform or rear plate is rather shapely, so she places marks to locate where the center is. She now folds it in half and cuts it out with scissors. Be sure that the fabric stays in its folded position as you cut it out. You don't want it to shift around because then you won't get the exact shape that you want for the opposite side. So hold the two sides together as you cut carefully. Now she'll place the rear platform on top of the foam and check it to be sure that it is cut exactly how she wants it. Any edge that looks a little bit off can be easily trimmed to size. Here at the centered location, there's a little bit of excess fabric here, so she's going to trim it so that it looks nice and straight. Now all that's needed is to take it over to the sewing machine and sew those three plates together. We'll start by sewing the front platform and the riser section together. Notice the riser is facing down on top of the front platform, so the outside surfaces are facing each other. She takes it over to the Sailrite 111 sewing machine and sews a straight stitch down the length of the fabric, joining those two sections together. Notice the stitch is approximately 1/4 inch from the raw edge of the fabric. Be sure to reverse at the beginning and the end of your stitches. Her stitch length is a little bit on the long side. It'd probably be better to sew about a 3mm stitch length on our first primary stitch. Now the top stitch should be at least a 6mm stitch length. There's no reason to go short here. This top stitch reinforces the seam and also gives it a beautiful finished look. This is called a semi-flat felled seam. Be sure to sew through the flap on the bottom side. That reinforces the seam securely and keeps it from pulling apart. If the plates don't match up exactly on the ends, you can just trim them to size. Let's flip this over and take a look at the fabric pole section. Remember, we left about a 1/2 inch of extra fabric here, and that will be used later on to create the fabric pole. Next, we'll join the rear platform to the riser section. Flip the panel over, find the center of that so we know exactly where to start. We're going to mark it with a pencil at the center location on the underside of the fabric. We'll do the same thing to the opposite two plates we just sewed together. Place those plates so the inside surfaces are facing each other and the center is lined up perfectly. Then start from the center location and sew approximately 1/4 inch away from the raw edge, being sure to reverse there at the beginning of the stitch at the center location. Then pull the fabric plates together so the edges are lined up as you sew approximately 1/4 inch away from the raw edge. And then reverse at the end. Now, starting from that center location again, we'll sew the opposite side. In the exact same procedure that we did earlier. Fold it so that the fabric is right side out. You'll see they're joined together nicely. Now all we have to do is create that top stitch like we did previously, being sure that we catch the flap on the bottom side. This is a semi-flat felled seam, and again this stitch should be about 6 millimeters in length. The first primary stitch should be around 3 millimeters in length. We did not sew it that way in the video for the first primary stitch, but that's really what it should be to help reinforce it. We're going to fast forward through this sewing because it's pretty much the same, so we're going to do this in double time. Now all the plates are sewn together and here's what it looks like. Looks great. Next we'll be joining the boxing to this top plate section. When cutting your boxing to size, be sure there's enough fabric to wrap around the backing board. For this seat, 8 inches looks to be sufficient. We'll mark the Allsport 4-way stretch vinyl fabric to 8 inches and cut strips that are 8 inches wide. We'll be joining 2 strips together, so we're going to make 2 strips that will wrap all the way around the perimeter of our seat. The side of our seat will be this violet color. We'll place those 2 panels directly on top of each other so the outside surfaces are facing each other, and then sew with that 3 millimeter stitch length approximately 1/4 inch away from the raw edge, and then we'll create our top stitch. This is a semi-flat felled seam, being sure that the top stitch is catching the flap of fabric on the bottom side. Now to join the plate and the boxing together. Here at the nose of the seat, Angela is going to find the center. So she folds the material in half. That's where she will have the seam that joins the boxing together start at. So she marks it with a pencil. Now she'll take the nose of the plate and join it with that seam that she created on the boxing. And she will sew approximately 1/4 inch all around the perimeter. This stitch is a little bit on the long side. It typically should be around 3 millimeters in length, and we're sewing with about a 6 millimeter stitch length, which is not as good as it could have been if it were 3 millimeters in length. The Sailrite 111 sewing machine is a compound walking foot machine, but the Allsport 4-way stretch vinyl fabric is very stretchy, so as she gets to the seam here, the junction where there's a lot of bulk, she has to help pull the fabric through the sewing machine. In some situations you may need to bury your needle, lift your foot, and pull the fabric through, and then lower the foot and continue to sew. Now here at the rear position at the center, she stops short of the center, approximately 1 inch or 2 away from the center. Then she'll start again at the center location on the nose piece. That way she can join the boxing together at the rear position when she sews around the opposite side, just as she did earlier. We're going to fast forward through this portion because it's exactly the same as done earlier, but just line up the fabric as you sew the boxing to the plates. We'll slow up the film a little bit here, and here you can see the 2 edges being sewn so they're directly opposite of each other, and the stitch approximately 1/4 inch away from the raw edge. And here's the rear of the cushion, and you notice she stops approximately 1 inch from the center location. Those can be joined together prior to stitching them to the top plate now. So we'll find where the boxing should be joined together by squeezing it together there, and that's where our straight stitch will be positioned to join the boxing together. After the straight stitch joins the boxing together, then we'll create the top stitch to join that boxing, and then we'll sew the boxing, the remainder, the portion we did not sew at that rear center location, together after that. So here she's cutting off the excess fabric. Now she'll fold the fabric right side out, and she'll create the top stitch. This is the semi-flat felled seam. Also notice that if she wants to make adjustments, she buries the needle so that the fabric stays in position, makes adjustments, and then continues to sew. Now that the boxing has been joined together at the rear, we'll now join the boxing to the top plate, the portion that we did not sew. So this is approximately 2 to 4 inches of an unstitched area, so we're just joining that area together with a straight stitch. Great, now the boxing is joined to the plates. Now all we need to do is create that top stitch around the entire perimeter of the boxing, being sure to catch the flange on the bottom side as we sew through it. And again, this stitch should be approximately 6 millimeters in length. Anywhere there's a junction, because the fabric is rather stretchy, you may need to help the sewing machine pull it through. This type of vinyl fabric always works best with a walking foot sewing machine. This Sailrite 111 sewing machine is a compound walking foot sewing machine, and also the Sailrite Ultra Feed sewing machines are a great walking foot sewing machine that'll sew this fabric beautifully. We're going to show this in double time. You'll also notice that as she sews the top stitch, that she's pulling the fabric panels apart so that the fold is directly on that first primary stitch that we created. Here we are coming to the beginning portion of our top stitch. We'll reverse a little bit to lock the stitch in place here. Alright, our sewing is complete. The only thing left to do now is to take the cover over and work on our fabric poles. That's coming up next. We'll recover the foam with our plastic film that helps to prevent water from leaking into the foam if it leaks through the vinyl cover. Then we'll place the cover on, the front portion of the cover on, so that we can gain access to the fabric poles and know exactly how to cut our fabric pole so that it slides easily into the holes in the foam. What you want to do here is you want to create a pole that'll easily slide into the hole in the foam. So she's cutting the excess fabric here so that there's approximately a 1/2 inch tab of fabric that can be pulled into that hole. We're going to use a twine here. This is a pre-waxed twine and a hand needle, and create a knot at the end of our twine. We'll use the hand needle and push it through the fabric pole very close to our stitch line. Then we'll push the hand needle through the opening in the twine to secure it in place to the fabric pole. Then we'll puncture the pole one more time just to be sure that it doesn't rip out easily. Now we can push that needle down through the hole, and we'll grab hold of the needle on the underside of the cushion and pull it through. We'll cut off some of the excess thread, being sure that there's at least a foot of thread. We did that exact same procedure for the opposite pole. We didn't show that. From the underside of the seat, pull on the twine to pull the fabric pole deeply into the foam so that there's quite a bit of tension there. Then we'll place those washers on the back side of the foam, feeding the twine through the center of the washer. Now we're going to use a cotter pin here. You can use anything that will help to apply tension to the twine. and something that you can tie in place. So she's just going to wrap this twine around the cotter pin here and secure it in place, and then she'll create a knot to hold it in place, being sure that there's plenty of tension there to help pull the fabric down into the groove of the rise. We'll show this in double time. There are special upholstery tools called tufting needles that you can purchase for things like what we're calling fabric poles, and there are such things as tufting clamps. However, using a cotter pin works great just as well. We did not show the installation of the second fabric pole. And here's what it looks like from the top side. We're almost done. Now all we have to do is pull the Allsport 4-way stretch vinyl fabric over the foam. Since we did not add a seam allowance, we took away some of the fabric, obviously for our semi-flat filled seams. This cover is rather small. It is a tight fit, but that's the beauty of the Allsport 4-way stretch vinyl fabric. It can be stretched to fit this foam beautifully. Next, we'll reinsert the backer board, which is a plastic board for this seat. To secure the fabric in place, we're just going to use a standard stapling gun, because that's typically what most of our customers have. It's not a bad idea to get a second helper, especially when you put the first preliminary staples in place. The goal is to pull the fabric taut until the seam that joins the boxing to the plates is right along the edge of the top portion of our seat. Then we'll put about 5 staples or 4 staples in place and inspect our work. Now, is the seam in the right spot? Yes, it's beautiful. Then we'll tack the opposite side before we move on. So again, a second helper is needed here to hold the backer board in place and to pull the fabric tightly so that that seam is right where we want it. We want to be sure the seam is directly on top of the edge of the foam as it is on the opposite side, so that it looks uniform. The whole reason for this video is for exactly what you're seeing here. The Allsport 4-way stretch vinyl fabric is a 360-degree fabric that stretches beautifully in any direction. This cannot be done with a regular vinyl fabric. A regular vinyl fabric would have to have all kinds of shape built into it by cutting panels out and sewing them together. But as you can see, with this fabric, it is possible to create a beautiful shape around almost any kind of contoured seat. A second helper is no longer needed now that the fabric is pulled tightly onto the seat. Now all we need to do is continue to pull tightly and secure it in place with staples. Since the fabric is pulled so tightly, it's a good idea to put quite a few staples in here to prevent any rippage. We're using a standard arrow stapler with stainless steel staples, just to demonstrate that it can be done with standard household tools. However, using a pneumatic staple gun or electric staple gun would be a lot faster. We're going to skip some of the stapling and we're going to show the remainder of it in double time. Alright, she's now stapled all around the perimeter, and now let's take a look and see what she looks like.
It's very nice.
It is so like a shoe.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Now we'll trim some of that excess fabric hanging down on the bottom side. No reason to have all this extra fabric. And be sure to trim the fabric away from any type of fastener system. Here you can see a metal fastener that is used to hold the motorcycle seat to the frame. Allsport 4-way stretch vinyl is perfect for automotive interiors, golf cart seats, motorcycles, lifeline chairs, snowmobiles, tractor seats, personal watercraft, marine seating, home office seating, and much more. It's your loyal patronage to Sailrite that makes these free videos possible. Thanks for your support.